time off, and hope everybody had good vacations and lots of great things happened. First off is the committee reports and anything else you want to reflect on during this time. And I'll just mention a couple things really quickly. One is I just want to thank the staff for all the work they went through to put on the State of the City, and my great appreciation for all the effort that went into that event. And
they're wanting you to speak out into the mic, I think.
Oh, that means, okay. Got it. All right. So I want to thank our staff and everyone who was involved in such a great State of the City. I know it took a lot of work on a number of people's parts, and I just want to be very appreciative of that. I wanted to remind people that, and Greg may have something to say about this after he settles in here, about MLK Day on Monday. And then I wanted to say congratulations to Terry McDonald for being chosen the first citizen of Eugene. That's a great thing, and he deserves it. And then I have one for all those thanks and appreciation and being ready for the year. And I did want to say, before we move on, I want to thank George Poling for his role as council president over the last year. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
And then I did want to express one concern, because I think it paints such a poor picture of our city, is that the Peace Park in Alden Baker Park has had a continuous defacement of the president's picture there. And I just think that is a very bad thing that we have to figure out how to do something about, because it doesn't speak well of our community. So with that, George?
Thank you. Just like I don't have any committee reports to do today, but I would like to just send out a big thank you to the Harlow Neighborhood Association during the winter break. The Harlow Serves got together and put together 1,500 meals for Holt Elementary kids that qualify for the free meals. And this is a neighborhood project. And my understanding, I think the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood may have done this also. But the donations from the residents of the Harlow Neighborhood Association of all the different type foods, like I said, we put together 1,500 meals. That's 75 kids that got a lunch and a breakfast through this effort. So a big thank you to the Harlow Neighborhood Association.
But they won the national award for it, right?
That's right. Set a trend. And then also just kind of a reminder about what's going on in the Northeast Neighborhood Association. We have currently 700 new units of housing going in, either recent or proposed housing, and most of it is right there at the Crescent, Coburg Road area, and it's really getting a lot. I think they figured out to be about 2,000 new residents once they're all filled, and 750 new units, and most of it, like I said, is multi-purpose, multi-family housing. So that may come up again in a discussion when we start talking about branch libraries. And then one other thing, if I have time, is I've been asked by the Harlow Neighborhood Association to bring a motion forward in reference to the property at 955 Coburg Road. I'm not going to do it tonight. We have a very important topic for the work session, so I'm not going to take up the time tonight. I will bring it up at the work session on Wednesday. And basically what's going on is there's been some negotiations going on with the property owner and the Harlow Neighborhood Association. They're about ready to reach an agreement on how that's going to be developed. So my motion to initiate the Metro Plan amendment may or may not be needed. So what I plan on doing is putting out a motion that will schedule a work session on or before February 12th. Basically, it's what Alan brought up at the work session when we were discussing this motion, and it would be to deliberate on initiating a process to amend the Metro Plan amendment. If the agreement is reached by the neighborhood association, or the neighbors rather, and the property owner, then the Metro Plan amendment won't be necessary, and also the work session won't be necessary. So hopefully we can get to it. They're about that far away from agreement, and it'll be a win-win for everybody.
No, I don't have anything.
Greg?
Well, I have something, but the dog ate my homework on this one, Mayor. I left it at my desk at work, but I did attend both the Public Safety Coordinating Council meeting back in December, and also the Human Services Commission meeting today. However, I was there for a short period of time because I had another meeting across town. So I'll bring back a report the next time we come back around. The other thing is that, as you all know, the MLK celebration is coming up on Monday the 20th. There are 3 specific events around that. The first is the march at 9:30, which will start over in the Autzen Stadium parking lot and come down to the shed. I won't be able to attend that because I am going to be working on the evening event at LCC, which is the event that features the actor Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad and now currently on Revolution on NBC. An actor who has a very long and storied career going back to 1965. He will be here. The event will be at 6:30 at Lane. There will be a reception, invitation only prior to that, and I think we'll have invitations at your, Beth has the invitations.
I think everybody's got one up at their desk.
Yeah, okay. Everybody's got one at their desk there. So if you want tickets to the event, they are limited, so you'll have to email me at my email address at Lane to reserve tickets, but they're going pretty fast right now. So we should have a packed house. And the other event is the Springfield March, which will be going from the Springfield Justice Center to the high school, and that is traditionally at 2 o'clock in Springfield. So those are the 3 major events happening on Monday, and I want to extend that invitation out to my council colleagues and city manager and city staff. We've got some tickets through the Human Rights Commission is holding on to some tickets as well. So.
Great, thank you, Greg. Yes, George?
I would like to say something after all. My regular council assignments, we didn't meet in December because of the snowstorm, so I attended the Mackenzie Watershed Council and Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission, and I'll report on those fuller when they're scheduled. I did want to say that I did attend Senator Merkley's town hall at LCC last Sunday. It was great. It was packed. We were very well attended. Many important topics were discussed. He answered lots of questions from the audience. And then a few days later, he held a press release at a certain grocery store downtown to announce the kickoff of the national minimum wage campaign to raise the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. He's co-sponsoring and leading the charge in that very important movement, and so that was a very nice event too. And also I've been working day and night on talking with interested parties who want to rehab and develop at Civic Stadium. I think there's still time to pull something together very attractive that will answer a lot of the councilors' concerns about who's going to pay for it all. That project is very much alive, and so I just wanted to report on that. Thank you.
Betty?
Thank you. I have a letter here with concerns about animals, and I don't know what we can do about it, but maybe we have animal control, but they don't control turkeys. And people are very concerned about wild turkeys, deer, and feral cats. The turkeys seem to be the big thing. And I was sent a letter, a clipping from Jefferson, that's in Oregon, I think somewhere, that they made a law, that they have a law that you can't feed wild turkeys. And this person suggested that we might want to have such a law. I don't know whether, I assume that we could if we wanted to. And anyway, they do a lot of damage. They do damage to gardens and make the place smell bad and other things, I think. In my case, they upset my dog, but that is not why I'm bringing it up. But I did say I would find out if there's anything we can do about, I know we talked about deer before, I don't think we can do anything about that. But if it's possible for us to do anything about the wild turkeys, they are really, I guess to some people they're fun, and to other people they're becoming really a big problem.
If you give us a copy of the letter, we can take a look at it, and then at
Give you
least
the
we
whole
can
thing.
let you know what currently is on the books around wild
Thank
turkey
you.
in particular.
Thank you. This person also thought we should license cats, but I think we have discussed that before. There's certainly good arguments for it. And I know some cat lovers who would support it. Not all of them. Thank you. That's all.
They would probably just ignore the licenses anyway.
Alan?
Particularly my
Cats.
cat. Yeah, particularly my
License.
cat.
I had Sustainability Commission and MPC. I'll do MPC first, and at the end, Mayor, if you wanted to talk anything about rail and Lane Act, since you're intricately involved in both of those. MPC, I think the big things are Connect Oregon 5 is in play, and that's $140 million for this biennium. And the new projects that are in that from our area are the Eugene Bike Share Program, and that we put in an application for. I got a little handout here, it describes what it is. It's a 170 bike 24 station system that connects up with the U of O's proposed system, which is 40 bikes and 4 stations. So those would be 210 bicycles and 28 stations, and it's where you can basically rent the bike and go from point to point. And in other places where they've done that, it's been extremely successful. And the city's committed to making the system a success by providing a match of $227,000 for this part of it from the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. And LTD and the city already have done the feasibility study through STIP monies. And some interesting facts about that. While this hasn't been completely designed, that's what this is all about. In Washington, D.C., they do this, and it's extremely successful. And they 83% of the bike share people said they were more likely to patronize or go to and visit a local business if it was near a bike station. So it has a pretty big economic development impact. So that's between downtown and the U of O in that corridor. The other projects there were revamping the LTD Franklin Station and because of the roundabout, that's going to go in Glenwood. And then LTD bridges to connect off of West 11th for pedestrian and bicyclists. Also, scenario planning is up and going, a new project manager, so that got a restart. And then the STIP money that is going forward to work on $2.5 million for the Beltline Safety Project and the Beltline NEPA projects. So that's the MPC. Do you have anything to add on rail or Lane Act there?
Just a couple of things that the two new trains have gone through testing and are now in use for Amtrak. And the difficult part of that is, yes, we are really pleased to have the new trains, and a lot of people here aren't very happy that the 9 o'clock route has been removed and replaced with a bus. So they feel like we've gotten more train and less train for Eugene. So there's some. So Hal Gard from the ODOT has offered to come down and talk to people about the schedule, and I'll probably set that up. I'd like him to hear from people from here, so it's a two-way conversation. The ACT met on the night that we had the State of the City. Hillary Wiley is the new chair, so that's off my list of things I have to do, and they had a presentation on health and transportation. So, and I think they needed to have that conversation. It's a really good thing. Claire.
Also, Sustainability Commission, you want to come back around to me, or let me do that?
Go ahead.
So Sustainability Commission, we all got the work plan back in October, so they've been working on implementing that work plan. One of the big things on that work plan is implementation of the TBL tool that we have. They took the stormwater regulation and looked at the TBL analysis, not for us to look at in terms of our decision tonight, but how it could be used better and how it can be used by staff. So that was a useful workshop with the staff on that. We're also doing there's a sustainable business practices subgroup, which is looking at reaching out to the communities. We had various resources, especially the Rethink Bring Recycling program that the city and LTD and other folks fund. And there is they've done an investigation of this, and of course there needs more promotion of that. More they interviewed businesses, more promotion, more information about that, and of course Rethink are the businesses that go into the bold steps award that the mayor presented at the State of the City. So there'll be a letter. I think we're going to discuss at our next meeting, which is on Wednesday, a letter about sustainable business practice that's going to go to the city manager, but the council will be CC'd on that. Talking about that program, how it can be used better, and the investigation that we did. We all got that letter on the budget committee and about the benefits of sustainability. The new City Hall design team actually came to the Sustainability Commission and talked to the Sustainability Commission for about an hour on the new City Hall and got their input. I know Councilor Evans is really interested in this. We've been working a lot on the food policy, and we sent a letter. Sustainability sent a letter to the City Council staff, which they're responding to. It's been pretty tardy, but it should be coming soon. One of the things in there is a task force on food policy that we'll probably bring forward, maybe Councilor Evans and I. Coming up, the trans plan is coming your way soon, and the Sustainability Commission is working on looking at the trans plan, starting this next meeting on Wednesday. And then on February 19th, on the council, the internal climate action plan actually comes to us as a workshop, and we'll be discussing how we're doing as an internal agency towards meeting those goals that we have. And then also the Sustainability Commission is reaching out to work with the Planning Commission on the South Willamette improvements plan that's moving forward, and how that might relate it to the triple bottom line analysis. And I guess the next meeting is Wednesday the 15th in the Atrium Building.
Thank you for that report. Claire?
So some of my committee assignments have not met recently. I am on the Human Services Commission, but I was not able to attend the meeting today, so I can't provide the report either. And the Police Commission did meet last week, and they are hard at work, and they're coming to the council this week to have a work session with them, so I won't make a report on that. We can talk with them in person. So I just thought I'd take the opportunity. I wanted to extend a thank you to the Train Song Neighborhood Association for creating a welcoming space for the new rest stop that's opened up not too far from Opportunity Village, which is another project they also embraced. And that's partly because both in Opportunity Village and the new rest stop, the folks involved in that went to the Neighborhood Association and spoke with them and made presentations and engaged in a dialogue, and that really helped set a positive stage for both of those places opening up there. So I just wanted to publicly thank the Train Song Neighborhood Association, and I hope to attend their meeting this week and do that in person. And then I just wanted to share that the counselors received an invitation a couple of months ago to a play, an original play that was performed, written and performed by students at Oak Hill School. I'm afraid I don't have the program with me to name the playwright by name, but it was a 14-year-old student there who wrote a play called The Council, which was loosely based on occurrences in a nearby small city, and all took place in a council chamber, and was very well done, very well written, really a joy to watch. And Mayor Piercy was there, as was one of the Springfield city councilors and some folks from Crestwell, and then the place was packed with parents and supporters. And I just wanted to acknowledge that work as a former professional stage manager who used to work in theater and work on a number of original plays. I was very, very impressed, and think the play itself has potential to go on to bigger things. So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement.
I think something called The Council would be boring, but it
Was
wasn't.
not. It was quite hilarious.
People get to choose who will play them in the movie?
Yeah.
If they're elected.
Like,
Never boring. I could never imagine it being boring. Just that one, I don't think so. I was sorry that I had to miss that show as well. This last weekend, I was looking forward to that. I'm very sorry that I missed it. Perhaps if there's a videotape of it somewhere, I might be able to see that, because I think I'd like to. I have the opportunity to serve with Claire as well on the police commission, as we're seeing them. I won't either go into that, but we did, the both of us, attend another meeting a few weeks ago with folks from ODOT and our staff on the redesign of the Beltline between Coburg and River Road. That section is our region's, unless I'm mistaken, I know it's our city's, but I think it's our region's top priority to ODOT.
Yep.
And so we are narrowing down to just the last few potential options. It's just pre-NEPA, as Alan had mentioned, the funding being there for that. And in our last meeting then, I think that the folks from ODOT mentioned they are likely to come before the entire council. Asked Claire and I what we thought. We both said, yeah, kind of give you guys an update of the work at some point here in the near future, so that nothing comes as a surprise when we have to vote on the final option to send that forward for work. It's probably still a few years away in terms of its rebuild, but once it is, we're hopeful that that can have some impact on capacity and safety for that stretch of Beltline. So we've been working on that.
Chris.
Thank you. I just remembered when Betty was talking about turkeys and other animals, an entire story in Time Magazine a couple of weeks ago on the incredible increase in feral animals. And deer population, this is national, has increased 800% just within the last 20 years. But the turkey population has increased 1,500% within the last 20 years, which gives you a sense of explosive growth within those areas. I think deer and turkey are a significant problem nationally, but they are a significant problem in our area. And we had a work session on feral cats not too long ago. I think that pales in comparison to some of the larger issues we're dealing with, so we may want to talk about that as well. Nutria on here? No, Nutria aren't, but for my money, beaver are on here, though. Yes. They've increased 2,400% in the last 20 years. Housing Policy Board has met, and the two issues they're working on right now are to bring to you a recommendation for the use of that 3-acre property on 13th and Chambers that used to be the National Guard site. It's empty now. I think that will be proposed for a low-income housing project, which, since we don't have land bank sites anymore, I think would be a very compatible use for that site. And we've talked to the neighborhood, and they're actually very excited about the possibility of having an actual constructed building there that could serve that purpose. And then also we are talking about what the housing situation related to Envision Eugene and how the efforts that are being done around multifamily housing is affecting that thing and one of the trends over the last few years. Also, LCOG has met, and I've been asked to serve on a committee to review dues. The dues structure that is right now paid through LCOG is really, it's kind of difficult to fathom in terms of who gets charged what and for what reason and what jurisdictions pay and how that translates into the amounts that are charged for individual services. So we're going to serve on a committee to kind of review that entire thing and make sense out of it and put it into a more organized fashion. And then lastly, the State of the City was great. I thought it really went off well, and George and the mayor and I attended the Springfield State of the City, which I also thought went very well, and they had some great things to talk about there, and what it did was just remind me how much our two communities are linked together and how much our mutual fortunes are in the best interest of each other. So it was a great State of the City, and I thought it went very well. That's all I have.
Great. And George, you want to say?
Yeah, one real quick thing. Last Monday on the 6th, I attended the Eugene Police Department promotion ceremony at 10th or 2nd and Chambers. They promoted 1 captain, 3 lieutenants, 8 sergeants, and 4 of their civilian employees. So congratulations to all the recently promoted people in EPD. Job well done. And again, it's just an amazing organization. I'm pretty proud of the people that they promoted. There's some pretty good employees in that group.
Thank you. John? Oh, Greg.
Yeah, one quick thing, Mayor, I forgot. I did attend the last couple of Human Rights Commission meetings, and the honorees for awards for the MLK Day celebration, there'll be a special award for Latina leaders, which will recognize Carmen Urbina, Rosemary Villanueva, and Francesca Johnson, who just retired from the city, and the honoree for the Human Rights Commission, as well as the Black Student Union and ASLCC. Well, all 3 awards will be going to Mary Spieldy.
For that. John?
One item, I had the opportunity over the holidays to take Amtrak up to Seattle. And for those that haven't done that, I would highly recommend that. It's a very pleasant trip. So it, for me, speaks again to the nicety of a rail system that works along the Willamette Valley and beyond in a way that's very comfortable, easy to use, and so I think it portends good things for us, Mayor, as you continue your work on the rail committee.
Right before, well, in December, we had our Leadership Council meeting on the Passenger Rail Committee that I'm co-chairing for the state, and they narrowed down the preferred alignment. It isn't down to the 1, but it's narrowed down considerably, so working through that. So, thank you, everybody. So now I think we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, which is the budget discussion on council policy items. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Christy and her team to do a little bit of a presentation and then, of course, a conversation with the council.
Hi, Happy New Year. Happy to be back talking about the budget and continue the momentum that you had from the fall. Without any further ado, we'll launch right into it. Vicki Silvers, our budget manager, is handing out a copy of the slides for you to take a look at, and we'll go through that. John, would you mind handing me the... Thank you very much. So tonight I want to begin by providing the context in which we've been working through the budget conversation over the last few months. As you recall, last spring, a good decision was made by the Budget Committee and approved by Council to solve the FY14 budget gap with some one-time dollars, but with a strong emphasis on continuing to look for a sustainable way to balance the budget moving forward, and launched right into discussions starting in July to help move through that process. As part of what we've been working on together, the committee met in July, and there developed a list from the different budget committee meetings that happened. They developed a list of about 56 items that came from about 3 different sources. One of those sources were some of the conversation topics that came up during the FY14 budget process and some of the city service fee conversations that were happening last spring. In addition, brainstorming ideas that came from the budget committee, and then just other ideas that came from budget committee members throughout the meetings that we had. Those items, those 56 items, really broke out into 3 different categories. They were service reductions, other approaches, and increased revenue. Other approaches were things like increasing the tax base, looking at personnel-related costs, and things like that. Those items were vetted by the financial investigative team, and they, if you remember, took a real thoughtful look at them and looked at them for whether or not they were legal, whether there would be funding available for the general fund in a broad context, and provided you all, as a budget committee, a list of sort of some thoughts about that to guide your decision making. The result of the conversations that have happened during the fall is that the Budget Committee then came up with a short list of 6 options, and those options will be going to the community to weigh in on, I believe, starting next week. And those are a list of potential service reductions. There was also another list that was developed that were the policy issues that were referred to City Council, and that's what I'm here tonight to discuss with you, and I'll go into that a little bit in a minute. And then there are longer-term solutions, and then items that will be going to the revenue team, and I'll touch a little bit on the revenue team and the status of that when I get to that bit of information. So for the context of tonight's discussion, one of the things that I would like you to do in kind of listening to our staff recommendation going forward is that we really looked at these. There's about 7 items, and I'll go over those in a minute. And we wanted to look at those in the context of what would help us in developing a strategy that could be implemented for FY15. And so we looked at all of the items that were policy level related through that lens. Some of these items are items that you're very familiar with. They're either scheduled for discussion or you've been discussing them already. The items on the list were to discontinue MUFD, fund capital improvement with bonds instead of using general fund dollars, increase the transient room tax, create business license fee, create bicycle registration fee, or terminate the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, and use parking funds to solve the budget gap. So as I go through these items, what we'll talk a little bit, or what I'll share with you is just a reminder about what the FIT team, the Financial Investigative Team, had to say, and what our staff recommendation is for each of these items. And when we get to the end of the presentation, if you have conversations about any of these topic areas, I'm happy to go back, and we have some other staff who can help answer questions as well. So the first one is the discontinuation of MUPD, and as you know, MUPD is the multi-unit property tax exemption. Council had already suspended the program and is already engaged in discussion. And during our conversation with the FIT, they reviewed this item and determined that there would not be potential dollars available from discontinuing MUPD because of the contracts that we were already obligated to complete. For this reason, they decided that this was a policy-level discussion, and given the fact that you all had already made the decision to have those conversations, staff is recommending that you take this off the list for consideration for fiscal year 15 until you've completed the work that you're doing, and in addition, that there really aren't dollars available to address the fiscal year 15 gap. The next one is to fund capital improvements with bonds. This was another suggestion. As you know, we do a general fund transfer of dollars to fund capital-related projects. And we've taken the approach at the City of Eugene sort of to live within our means, pay as we go for the work that we can accomplish. And while we're not able to accomplish everything we want to do, we're able to make significant strides in addressing our capital-related issues. There are 2 ways that you could go about funding our capital projects in a different way. You could go to the voters and ask for approval of GO bonds and levy, property tax levy to create a cash flow, which then would include the revenue to pay those bonds back. The other option is to just do general fund bonds, and then you would need to create a funding mechanism to repay those bonds as well. But the idea around both of those was that you'd be able to use the money that you're transferring from the general fund to fund capital projects. But there's a slight challenge with that, in that is in the second option, you have to have a funding stream to pay the cost of the bonds. In addition, there's a cost for issuing bonds and a lot of other associated costs. And what we're recommending at this time is that this item come off the list for consideration in solving the FY15 budget gap. There are times where we would want to be having discussions around funding large-scale capital projects with bonds, but in the context of the FY15 budget, we're recommending not to do that at this time. The next item, and I've grouped 3 of the 7 items in this category, which is increased revenues. Three ideas that were included are the transient room tax, and that would be looking at increasing the transient room tax from the 4.5% that we are already collecting, the business license fee idea, and the bicycle registration fee. Again, what we're recommending is that the Revenue Committee has been formed. We're in the process of getting those meetings scheduled, and what we're recommending is that those items move to that committee for further review. The next one is the termination of the Riverfront Urban Renewal District. Terminating the Riverfront Urban Renewal District would generate approximately $360,000 in additional property tax dollars to the city's general fund as of our estimates from last year. Council, as you know, you all... Sorry. That's okay. It's a nice, happy song. That's right.
I apologize.
No problem.
If we made him dance to it, he probably would never have it on again.
Thanks for that mental picture.
It's a happy little tune.
I can't get out.
Okay. So council is in the process right now of working with eWeb and redevelopment of the Riverfront site. And one of the key tools available for doing that is Riverfront Urban Renewal dollars. And what we're recommending is rather than proceed with a strategy to use these dollars to fund the FY15 budget gap, that council consider this in the context of the policy level discussion that you're having around the eWeb site development and decide what's best moving forward in the broader context. And so for that reason, we're recommending that this not move forward for consideration for fiscal year 15. The next item is to use parking funds to solve the FY15 budget gap. And that actually is a strategy that we have, utilized at different times. The FIT reviewed the potential parking fund strategy to contribute additional dollars to the general fund as a means for solving part of the gap. And what they found is that there may be additional funds that could be used, but it would require rate increases, elimination of free parking, or other actions that would be detrimental to parking operations. The FIT also noted that the parking garages have significantly underfunded deferred maintenance needs and no way to pay for those at this time. They urged staff to look for ways to adequately maintain those garages moving forward and to address the capital deficit that we're trying to overcome there. They also said that they discussed the impact on the changes in the parking operations and how they may impact the downtown revitalization effort that is underway. So for that reason, I'm going to share a little bit more information about the parking fund, but in general, the staff is recommending that we take this off the list at this time for solving the FY15 budget gap. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the health of the parking fund. This chart that we have in front of us basically shows the past 2 years, the current year, and looks to FY15. We have, as I mentioned, used parking fund dollars as a strategy for helping solve the general fund gap over the past few years. And in FY11, the contribution to the general fund was increased by $560,000. At that time, the transfer was about $1.1 million. As mentioned in the FIT template that you received, the fund was only able to contribute that level of contribution for 1 year. The revenues were unable to keep up with the expenditures, and we were not able to make a contribution of $568,000. The pattern continued in FY13, and we did not transfer $430,000. To give you some context, if we ended the free parking program and collected the meter revenue in the downtown during FY13, we would still not have met our original general fund commitment. To give an example of what would need to be done to meet the general fund transfer commitment as it currently stands, we would need to end free parking downtown, eliminate the first free hour in the garages, and raise rates a minimum of 25 cents an hour. In addition, this kind of change in parking rates would not take into account the city's the need to address the deficit in the parking garages and to try to to build up some capital to address those needs. There are big, expensive structures that we're not currently able to set aside funds for because of the health of the fund. Overall, the parking fund would be considered in a yellow status if you look at it from a red, green, yellow status for financial indicator in the health of the fund. And it ended up in FY13 with less than $200,000, which is significantly below what would be considered a prudent reserve for that level of a fund. We're suggesting that this not be considered, as mentioned previously, for fiscal year 15 as a strategy based on the health and the status of that fund, and that sometime in the future, as council's had more conversation, that you contemplate something at that time. So the last slide here is just a summary of the recommendations. So the two items, boy, I can barely read that. I don't know about you guys, but so the summary of the recommendation is that we do not consider terminating the Riverfront Urban Renewal District or parking funds in the context of the FY15 budget. That we refer the three items I mentioned to the revenue team, which is the transient room tax, business license fee, and the bicycle registration fee for more detailed discussion. And that at this time, we would recommend that we drop from further budget discussion or consideration the MUPTI, discontinuing MUPTI, or using bonds to fund our capital. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Mike?
Wow, thank you for that one faster. I was kind of shocked there. Thank you for that presentation. Appreciate that information. There was an idea when we had the, I don't know, year and a half of meetings about parking and all of the meetings that Betty and I, a couple others, went to in order to finally get to where we were. There was an idea raised, and then it got raised here at the council table, but I don't remember ever having any staff specifics coming back about why we wouldn't want to investigate this opportunity or do it. It was somebody else's idea, and I thought it was a good one. It's this, and it adds parking revenue, and it also does something to add more parking spaces around the university area, which is something that's badly needed, as I understand it. If you drive on 13th from Alder to Kincaid, a short while ago, they changed that so that it's diagonal head-in parking like this as you go down, and so there are a lot more parking places than there were before when it was parallel to the sidewalk. And they made it a one-way that's just got one lane, and then all those. Someone came up with the idea, and I really liked it, that we look at the streets between 18th and 19th, between Agate and Alder, and do the same thing with all of them, where right there on the edge of the university, those streets become one-way, alternating, with diagonal head-in parking all the way down, because it would add hundreds of parking places for university students and change the revenue stream. I never remember staff coming back to us with an answer on that, so I was wondering if we could get that.
Yes, I don't recall if we've come back with something or not. I'd have to go back and check.
If it's feasible, I'd like to discuss it. If it's not, I'd like to know why.
Okay.
I've got Claire and then George Brown.
So I just had a few questions. On the capital bond for capital improvements, is there an analysis of a cost benefit? Because what I'm hearing is that there's some costs associated with going out for a bond and for paying that off. But I would like to see if we've had a cost-benefit analysis of even if it was just an example or something that we had looked at in the past. It might be helpful to me to see that, if that can be provided. And I'm wondering, we were talking about the parking garages having deferred maintenance, so it seems to me there might be some other capital needs, setting aside the question of City Hall, that might benefit from a bond. So is that a correct assumption? Are there other capital needs the city might have that could be met with an issuance of bonds?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there are a whole variety of them. The pools come to mind immediately. There's some work that is needed on those. Some of the community centers need work. Part of the challenge is if we go out with a GEO bond, of course, it requires an election. and so that's new revenue coming in. If it's trying to pay for it with already existing revenue, that becomes a challenge because we don't have the existing revenue really to back against a bond. And in our general fund, the amount of capital projects every year is $1 million, $1.5 million, couple million. So it's not a huge amount. And so to do that every year, that would be very costly. If you looked out 5 years, maybe you could do something for $10 million. But some of those projects are, if we went out for a GO bond on just a sort of general facilities upgrade, might be able to do that if you get enough volume of that. But we need to create a new revenue source in order to pay for those. To the answer to your original question, yes, there are other capital improvements that could be included in that.
It would also add to our debt burden, is that
Yes.
an accurate statement? I was curious why, as with some of the other new revenue-generating items, staff didn't recommend sending this idea to the revenue team. Is it because you just prefer not to have it discussed at all?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think there are appropriate times to be discussing whether or not we bond our capital work. But we don't, obviously a large-scale project like a city hall or something like that, it would be something that would be a significant. The smaller projects that city manager is referring to, it's more costly, and by the time our finance director, I'm channeling her right now, she's done some analysis and has some charts that really show that when you borrow money to do shorter-term projects and the amount of money that you can borrow, by the time you start getting to the end of that, the amount that you're paying back to pay the debt back, you're actually able to do less and accomplish less with those dollars that you have available than if we were to just continue to use the pay-as-you-go approach. It's just a more efficient way to use our dollars that we have available. I think it just all depends on a strategy and what that involves, and whether you group a large group of projects together or you have something significant in mind that you want to accomplish. But that's the biggest reason is that we don't see any immediate benefit to fiscal year 15 that significantly improves our deferred maintenance backlog or helps further our other goals.
Did I run out of time?
I don't know what happened to the judge.
Okay, I didn't think so. I had a couple more questions.
It broke for a few minutes.
All right. So there was one piece in the Urban Renewal District at the very end of attachment, not the very end, excuse me, the end of the first page of attachment C, page 13 of our packet, where it says 4J's local option levy. For 4J's local option levy, terminating the urban renewal districts would reduce annual school district revenues due to the state property tax system. That was a confusing statement.
Right. Our expert on that is our finance director, and what she informed me today is that she's working on a memo to get to you all that will describe that in a little bit more detail so you have the information available to you. But rather than trying, it's a pretty detailed type of discussion to explain all the ins and outs, and I would rather be able to provide it to you if you're okay with that in writing.
No, that'd be great.
Okay.
And then I'd like to get more detail on what the line item in the parking fund that goes to downtown police, what exactly that's going to support. So some budget detail on that, which might have to come from the chief.
I can give you the quick answer. It's the 9 officers. You weren't on the council at the time, but what happened was with the downtown urban renewal district, a portion of that was to use urban renewal districts to pay off the bond on a garage, and which was being used by the parking fund was paying that off, and instead used the parking fund money to fund these 9 police officers. Yeah.
Swampity-doo.
Okay. And if I could get some background on that in a memo, that'd be great.
Okay.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
So I have George Brown, and then Greg, and then Chris, and then Alan, and then Betty. George.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to go to the parking funds discussion here. My understanding is that by having free parking in our downtown zone, it's about $350,000 a year, perhaps more in foregone revenue that we're letting go of. That's a figure that I remember. I didn't bring all my stuff with me.
At the time that you did the free zone, it was about a $200,000 increase or decrease, and we raised rates since that time, and so it's not 350, it's somewhere closer, I think, to probably 275, 300.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that the argument that I've heard so far is pretty circular, because you're saying, well, we need that money to do deferred maintenance or to give it to the 9 officers or whatever, but we're deferring it, we're not collecting it now. So we're prejudicing the general fund's ability to do that. If we eliminated the free parking, the money goes into the general fund, I'd assume. Well, the parking fund, and then it can go anywhere where it wants to go, to the general fund. That would eliminate $275,000 from the $3 million deficit.
So
Okay?
if you go back to that slide.
Yeah, we have to.
Currently, as you can see over the last 2 years, last year we weren't able to contribute 430, and the year before 568. So if you eliminated free parking and we generated another $275,000 of revenue, based on how things are going, we still wouldn't be able to make the contribution we're already budgeted in. So to say we'd be able to make a $1.4 million transfer would be very challenging. So it's not that the money wouldn't help solve the problem that we have, it's just wouldn't be, I couldn't recommend you budgeting to be able to use that towards the $3 million gap, given that we're $430,000 short last year.
But by keeping, here's my point, though. I grasp that. I understand that part of it. But my point is, if you keep foregoing that revenue, you will never address this gap.
I don't disagree with
It'll
that.
just carry over from year to year to year to year to year. And, we know that in a couple of years, the downtown urban renewal district will sunset because the bonded debt will all be paid off. And that will transfer, that will redirect about $1 million to the general fund. So that'll be a huge, it's a ways off. It's a couple of years away. So that won't help us this year, obviously, but the help is on the way. And so I'm thinking of how do we keep providing services that are on the cut list for the next year or two until we get more revenue from that urban renewal district. And we know in the 2 more years that we got $500,000 more in property taxes, approximately, right, this year. It'll probably be that next year. It'll probably be that the year after. There's projects being built all over town. So the idea is, no, not forever and ever to do this, but to use it as a stopgap to help address. Because if we're not collecting the money, then, we can't do, it can't go to police officers downtown, it can't go to deferred maintenance. So we still have that problem, but we're not doing anything about it. If we did away with the free parking, that money would go to the general fund. Now, we may want to use it to help police, we may want to use it for whatever reason, but since it's not there, then we have to look at the list of cuts. Well, let's cut the Sheldon Branch Library. That's around $300,000. Let's cut something else. And this is just a thing that would help us avoid making one of those cuts for the next couple of years anyway, till we have more revenue coming in. And I believe that people parking downtown, they probably wouldn't like it at first, but if they was explained to them that, hey, this is help keeping the branch libraries open,
Thank you, George.
I think they might be willing to support it.
Well, I do think if the free parking program is eliminated, that does bring more money into the city's funds. The $3 million gap, I believe, assumes that the full transfer is being made in the parking fund already. And so it assumes that there's going to be that $928,000 transfer. In the last couple of years, we haven't been able to transfer all of that, so the 275 would be helpful, but it's not a direct one-for-one off of the $3 million gap, because that already assumes you're making the full transfer anyhow. Does that make sense? So,
Well, it does, but Since we're not making the transfers anyway, I mean, I don't see that argument makes too much sense, because
Greg, you're next up.
Thank you, Mayor. Could you talk a little bit about the potential of the business license fee, and particularly what the scope of that would look like? Would that be strictly a business fee? Would that be a business and occupation fee? Who would be exempt from it, or who would be involved in it? I've seen this in a couple of other cities that I've looked at, that there is a B&O fee structure. How would that look in terms of collection? Will we be using the Secretary of State's registry to kind of, assess, who would be in that ballpark? And, whether we separate out, healthcare professionals, say doctors or dentists, or, other professions in terms of assessing that fee?
I can jump in. We haven't done a lot of analysis around what the business fee would be. We would need to do that. Eugene is one of the few cities that does not have a business license fee, and we do have people call us and say, hey, I'd like to get my business license, mostly new people that are moving to town and trying to legitimize their business. As we've looked at it in the past, and when I say we, I mean the city organization has looked at it over the past however many years, it's always been anticipated to be something that would then support businesses back in some way, so it would fund some sort of new kind of support to developing, growing businesses. So I think as the revenue picks it up, we'll need to look at a couple of different models and have some conversations about whether that's something we do or don't want to support for general fund services.
Could we, in looking at that, would we be looking at specific infrastructure, matching, the revenue to the service, or how will we be looking at that? Because there would have to be something that, I think the business community would want to get out of that, other than just paying a license fee.
Yeah, I think it would have to be, I think this is very preliminary. It's an idea, and if the revenue team says, hey, we think that's an idea that is worth exploring, that's a conversation we're going to need to have with you about how you would want to structure that, and we could make some best practice recommendations, but I haven't done that work yet.
Chris?
Thank you. I appreciate the context this is done in, because I have to keep reminding myself this isn't a value judgment on these particular revenue options. It's a discussion of whether these particular revenue options work in the short-term context of balancing the budget. Because when you talk about bonds for capital, that's a traditional way of doing things. So as a budget balancing in the short term, now, of course, it really is not wise, but people need to understand that there will be needs for capital bonds. I mean, that's going to, we did that with streets, and we're going to have to do that with some other kinds of things. It's critically important to have that tool available, but to not confuse the current discussion, which is, what the heck can we do to try to balance the budget for this year in the short term? And in that context, I can see where this had to go. The disappointing part, which is not your problem, but just the disappointment in general, is the hope that there were these options out there that we could go and say, oh, we'll solve our problem, we'll just go do this, and then everything will be okay. And one by one, each one of those possibilities is evaporating, so that we're left with the original problem that we don't want to have to deal with, is figuring out how to make cuts. So then the point goes to, what are the consequences of either the cuts or the revenues or the other options? Whether we're talking about parking, what's the consequence of that? Or if we talk about eliminating the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, what is the consequence of that? Or making the cuts, what's the consequence of that? And I realize there is not going to be a winner in any one of these scenarios that we work out. So what this has done for me is it's provided me the context to say, don't try to go looking under some rock for a solution that's going to get you out of this, because it's not. These options, and I like the fact that some of them can be referred on for further discussion, but will be of no benefit for us in the current dilemma that we're in. So thanks for trying, but it's not going to help us get any further down the road, and we're back to the original problem, even though you did all of this work. But I think it was very informative to know what is possible and what is not possible. The one element that we didn't really talk about, though, because I realize also it's not relevant for this discussion, was the notion of revenue options, levies. I know that we had a library levy, we had it for a number of years, and that the council made, I think wrongly so, the decision to get rid of that operating levy and absorb the library into the general fund, which to me is how we got to the problem we're in right now. The public was very willing to support the library through an operating levy. Did so for a number of years before we made the decision to get rid of it, not the public. It may be possible for a future year, if we still continue to find ourselves in this dilemma, to consider re-looking at that option. It may seem like it's going backwards, but it may be at least worth looking at.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree there's no significant revenue source here. All of this discussion that happened before, that there was hidden money that we could use, didn't amount to anything, basically. We are back to the original plan, which is an original problem, which is which cuts to make. Fortunately, we got bailed out by the legislature with the PERS reform and a little better economy, and it went from $5.3 million down to $3 million, but we're still in that position without any significant room. But every little bit helps, so that's why we're having this conversation. The MUPD dollars, I just wanted to clarify, doesn't work, and there's $0 there, not because of the suspension, but because MUPD doesn't give any general fund dollars to any developer. It's a tax credit for future property tax. So even if we eliminated it, regardless of the suspension, it doesn't create any general fund dollars. So I wouldn't be in favor of doing that. We're in that conversation about how to reform it. So it doesn't make any sense to have that on the table anymore. Anyway, bonds for capital projects. To me, if you can do it without doing bonds, do capital projects without doing bonds, that makes the most sense. Bonds only increase your cost by having more interest and issuance cost and create debt. And if you can do it without that, that's the way to go. And so I wouldn't be in favor of that. I would be in favor of the pay-as-you-go system that we have now. I think that's the most prudent financial place to go for where we are with the amount of capital that we do. But for larger things like $50, $60 million to do roads is a different story. We can't do that on a pay-as-you-go basis without a levy. The only FY15 budget strategy idea here that I want to discuss any further is the elimination of the downtown free parking, and taking that and dedicating the $300,000 to general fund services makes sense to me. It doesn't change the parking fund's status, doesn't make it any better, but it doesn't make it any worse. And if we take that money and use it for general fund services, then I think that's a more important priority for me now. It's a trade-off that we have to make that Chris was talking about. The thing I didn't get was what you just said at the end of that conversation, was that the budget assumes a full transfer of the parking fund amount, which is deficit of about $500,000. So if we're not going to make that full transfer, then isn't the budget deficit $3.5 million instead of $3 million?
It's more than $3 million. I don't know what the number
Well,
is.
Well, if it's saying it's
right.
$500,000,
Right.
it's 3.5, not 3.
Yes, the budget deficit would be higher, that's correct. We continue to work all the levers in the parking fund daily to try to make the match, or the transfer, 100% transfer. So that's what we're still trying to do every year, which is why we budget for it.
Right. Yeah, I understand that. So, but if we were to get $500,000 out of by eliminating downtown free parking, we could use that to fund services.
There would be more money in the system to do something with.
Okay. So.
Hey, Betty? Thank you. That depends on people continuing to park downtown. We poured money into downtown to try to make it more attractive, and we're just making progress on that, and it is not the time to eliminate something that makes people feel welcome downtown. I think I couldn't disagree more strongly. As for eliminating MUPD, it wouldn't help us in FY15, but it might help us in FY16. If all those places that are not paying taxes were paying taxes, that would be a lot more money we'd have. And I know someone's going to say they wouldn't have been built without the exemption, but I don't believe that. And eliminating the riverfront urban renewal district, I think, is a good idea. I haven't been convinced that it's going, I don't understand how it would hurt the schools, but I would be interested in hearing that. That seems really strange to me, that diverting tax money would help the schools. That's what the urban renewal district is. You're diverting tax money from general fund to other things, to other particular areas. I think the room tax is something that would be, I know it wouldn't get a huge amount of money, but definitely it would help, it would do something that we have talked about before, help people who are using our facilities, help pay for them. And people who don't pay any taxes, obviously people who stay in hotels here, for the most part, are not paying city taxes. And anyone who's stayed in a hotel anywhere knows that there are a lot of taxes added to the bill, and it isn't going to keep you from going somewhere that you want to go. I think that's an easy and a good source. A business license, I've talked to a lot of people who have business licenses, and it's just routine. Landlords have to pay them too, and that's one thing I learned in connection with social host ordinances, that if a landlord has 3 violations, if his tenants do, the landlord sometimes loses his rental license. And I said, what is that? And they said, it's the same as, it's just his business license. It costs $200 a year. People here complain about 10, but $200 a year some places for each unit. Bicycle tax, I think, is a really bad idea for a city that wants to reduce the carbon footprint to get more people to use alternative transportation. Room tax, business license. Parking funds, I already said what I think about that. I think really there's no better investment we could make in downtown than having free parking. Thank you.
So round 2, I have Mike and then George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. This will be an interesting discussion. Betty just hit on something interesting. I'm hopeful we don't pursue a business license tax. Betty just said essentially that a bicycle tax would discourage people from riding bicycles. That taxing that would be a discouragement on something that's important to us.
It's a fee, not a tax.
Fee, registration fee, however you want it, whatever you want to call it. I can think of very few things that are more important for us than successful, healthy local businesses at this time. So I'm certainly hopeful that for the same reasons we don't consider that. But I agree with Alan, I agree with Chris that most times, and 99% of the time, borrowing or bonding for the sake of capital expenses is a very bad idea if you can pay for it on an ongoing basis. But I have to say, some of our choices may get to a point where I wonder if that's the wisest thought. Because if there was a time where the expense of borrowing was lower, I'm not sure when that would have been exactly in our history. The expense for borrowing, the expense for bonding, is certainly lower than it's ever been right now. So it is the least painful time to do so for a short time if we needed to. And so if the choice was close branch libraries or do more maintenance of the parking garages like we did with the roads by bonding them, and use some of that money instead for that ongoing expense for a short period of time, I might be inclined to agree that that was a wise way to go. I don't know. I do have a question for the manager, and I want to understand this better. There's a gentleman who knows a great deal more than I about the process of our city budget and the laws, the rules around that govern it. And he's not a staff person, but he's let's say he's been associated with the budgeting process for a long while. And he mentioned to me that the manager has authority up to some amount, I don't know what, to decide to issue municipal bonds without a vote of the council or a vote of people. I'd really like to know where those lines are. What has the manager authority to decide to do with regard to bonds, and/or what has the council, what requires a council vote or a public vote? Where are the thresholds, and what's possible? Can you help me understand that better?
I don't know all the legal pieces of that, so we can get back to you. There's a couple of things I think about, and I'd want to verify these. When with the road bonds, what happened was the voters approved the levy for that, and then we had to figure out how to best finance that, and the way we chose to do that was through actually essentially lines of credit as a way to do that, which is also a form of financing. Legally, I don't recall exactly how that process went, whether it was just strictly I had the authority to do that, or if we circled back with council. I don't remember that, so that would be one example. The piece that in any case would be there has to be a revenue source to match the ability to pay back the bond or the loan. And so if there isn't a new revenue source coming in, and even if we said interest rates are really low, go borrow the money, you still have to pay every month the bond back, and so you still have to have the money to pay the loan. And so it's that's the piece I think that we would want to talk about, is where's the money to pay back the loan.
With my last 4 seconds, that was the part I didn't add. I would say we have several things here referring to the other committee that are longer-term potential revenue solutions, and those are the things that I would apply to that, annexation, that sort of thing.
Hey, George Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just like to briefly go over, I agree with Councilor Zelenka. I think that the parking fund, the free parking program, should definitely move forward in the discussion. I also feel the same way about sunsetting the Riverfront Urban Renewal District as a possibility to keep looking at, because frankly, I wasn't real, the cost-benefit analysis for our last work session, it really wasn't a full-fledged cost-benefit analysis in my view. I think it was unconvincing. I think we could use more discussion on that. That's why I don't want to see this eliminated from moving forward as a possibility. I think it's kind of interesting the way it was put here in our AIS. It said, if we sunset that, it would free up $360,000 a year. That's currently going into the general balance of the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, and, quote, some one-time money. Well, that some one-time money would be $2.5 million as the city's share. Granted, it's one term, but that's a lot more than, it kind of makes it sound like pocket change. It's a significant chunk of money, and that could be dedicated for any kind of purpose that we want. I would recommend using part of it, at least, to address the budget deficit, as well as the ongoing every year would be $360,000. There's, one of the main arguments is, well, gee, that's to develop the EWEB property. That's going to be years before that property gets developed. And we're in trouble right now. We have a whole long list of all these services that we're going to cut without making some kind of significant fundamental change in the way that we decide to use people's tax dollars. And I just see every argument here so far recommending against any change whatsoever. And that's why I think these should be moved forward and not just scrubbed right now. I think the bond, general obligation bond thing should move forward too. We're getting, what do you suppose, 40, 50 emails every day about the Sheldon and Bethel branch libraries? The only thing that the Budget Committee menu of scenarios that went out to the public, it only concerns cuts. Hey, here's a list of different things to cut. None of these things are on that list, so they're not aware of these other options. All they're looking at is a list of things to be cut. And they can't suggest a remedy because they don't know about these other options. All anyone can do is say, please don't cut my library, or please don't cut my fire company, or, please keep the 4 police detectives, don't cut them. And they don't know that if we play around with these other things and be bold enough to make some kind of a fundamental change for the next 2 years until we get out of this crisis, they should move forward.
I've got Greg and Claire are in the queue, but I just want to pause here because we need to, and Alan, move toward finishing this up and getting ready for this 7:30 council meeting. So I'm looking at you all, the city manager, and saying, out of this conversation tonight, I've heard interest from Councilor Brown on further discussion for solving this budget issue of urban renewal district. I've heard parking. I've heard general obligation bond. But I've heard it only from individuals and not as a motion of the council that they want to keep those in the conversations. My point is that the reason we're having this conversation is to find out whether any of these things are things that you think can solve the current budget situation, and you want to look at them to address the current budget situation. So I think the only way we know what kind of support there is for future addressing these for this current budget cycle is for you to think about whether you want to put a motion out that we have further conversation about whichever ones of these you want to have further conversation, and those that you don't have any motion about means that you agree with the recommendation from staff. So just putting that out there. And so we're going to listen to Greg and Claire and Alan, and then we'll be looking to see if there's any motions. If there are no motions, then that means you are in support of staff recommendations. Okay? Great.
Thanks, Mayor. There was another possibility around fees that had come up and kind of floated away. One of those was a conversation about an entertainment fee, capturing revenue that, could be captured by all of the tourism and event kinds of things that keep coming through the city. I know, again, some other municipalities have entertainment-style fees in addition to room tax, and what would be the possibilities around that? The second thing is I have to disagree with Betty on this. I do think that a business license, not a business, but a bicycle license fee does make sense. We have miles and miles of bicycle, lane infrastructure all over this community, and it doesn't, make sense to not think that we don't have maintenance issues that go along with the roads that have some impact from bicycles. So I think that, where we can, garner some of that revenue, I think would make sense. I think that, people would, don't quote me on this, but I think that, people might be more open to looking at a bicycle fee. After all, we pay automobile fees all the time, and our state, license fees are well below what other states are across the country, and that's one of the reasons why we have infrastructure problems, particularly with roads in this state, because we are not paying what we should be paying for maintenance of our roads. And I think that anybody who uses the roads needs to pay for them, and that includes bicycles. So going back to my original issue, what if any conversations have happened around an entertainment fee?
The Revenue Committee will be taking a look at any number of fees. That could be one of those, as well as several others that we haven't even talked about here. They'll be looking at those. These particular ones, the business license, the transit, and the bicycle fee specifically came up during the Budget Committee meetings as one that people wanted to talk potentially use now as opposed to a future. The ones that the Revenue Committee are looking at are ones that are post FY15. So they can look at that one, and it may already be on their list to be looking at, as well as a variety of others.
Claire?
Thank you. So I tend to agree. I think if we're going to close this gap, that we need to be looking at maybe a combination of small fees, taxes that, or for the future for our sustainable budget, that don't place any big burden on any particular sector. So I think a nominal business license fee or a fee added to the sale of a bike or a registration that could be calibrated so it doesn't discourage those activities, but still could generate revenue. And obviously that would need to be balanced with the administrative cost of setting up those kinds of programs. But I think we're at a place where we all need to pitch in, and we asked folks to pitch in with the city service fee, and that wasn't calibrated correctly to pass muster with the voters. So we need to look for other strategies. I think the library levy discussion is very interesting because I have a similar analysis as Chris in terms of moving that into the general fund right when the recession hit, and really now we have branches threatened with closure, and folks really value those branches in many, many ways. And I think that I would, I'm not ready to make a motion right now because I had one more thing to say, but I think looking at parking as a way to generate some funding to close this gap is a reasonable thing. I think any viable business district in a downtown is going to ask people to pay for parking to go and do business there. It is not out of bounds for the city of Eugene to do that too. But I did want to ask the city manager, since these were a list of recommendations that were pulled forward from various past discussion, including our FY14 budget process and the city service fee, what's the status of the stormwater fee strategy that we had looked at way back when and had a public hearing on, and wondered if that might be something to bring back onto the table for conversation?
As you might remember, what the council did at that time was to table that ordinance, and so it still sits on the table. That ordinance included this idea of creating a separate fee, a stormwater fee, which obviously I think at the council level and wasn't something that people wanted to move forward on. And so the council could take that off the table and do something with that. If that were the case, we would have some recommendations on what to do. What was talked about before was even just allowing the stormwater funds to be used for parks maintenance, which is a relatively easy change to the ordinance without actually creating this whole new fee piece. That may be one way to do some things. So that's what the current status is right now. So a councilor can take that off the table and have the conversation if they choose to. But it sits at the table on the table right now.
Would it be possible for staff to maybe give us a refresher of where that is and what the amounts were and some of how it might impact this conversation? Would that
Yeah, we can
be
send
possible
something
in
out.
a few days?
Yeah,
That'd be great. Thank you.
Alan?
So the library operating levy actually, if I remember correctly, was a promise that was made during the campaign that it would be absorbed into the general fund over time, and we kept that promise and actually did that, and it was an appropriate thing to do because of that promise at that time. Maybe time to reevaluate that for FY16 and see if that's something that we might want to do, is put out another library levy to save some of the library services. I don't see that as a strategy for FY15, but FY16 potentially that could be something that people would be supportive of. I do think we should move forward with looking at downtown free parking. So I'll make a motion to consider eliminating downtown free parking and dedicating the revenue to the general fund services for FY15, and have the city manager bring back information about how to implement this idea and estimate the amount of revenue for further council action.
For a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right. Any further conversation on that motion? Okay. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes down. Okay. Mike, you're up next.
I will pass. I was thinking there may have been need for another motion, but it seems there's not.
Okay. George.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to move forward two other items, and we can probably, maybe want to vote on them separately. I move to not drop from consideration the idea of capital improvements with GO bonds.
There's a second?
I think we just need to talk about that.
There's a second? No second.
I'll second that for discussion. Could you clarify your motion, please?
Well, here's what we're hearing. Here's the information that we have that says, using GO bonds or bonds paid from existing revenues could be used, but would reduce dollar amounts available for capital purposes. Either approach would cost more money than using the current pay-as-you-go system. Well, the current pay-as-you-go system, continually drawing money out of the general fund to put in the facility reserve fund, for instance, for a new city hall, basically what we're saying is this money is going to go to build a new ceremonial city hall during the fiscal crisis that we're in, and it will not go for your services that you're used to. And that's why I think it's still an important topic of conversation. Is like I just mentioned before, it's not on the list of options that people are looking at that were sent to all the residents. It's not on the list of options. So I imagine a lot of people aren't even aware that that is one option. It doesn't mean that we're going to do it. It just means we carry it forward for more conversation and allow the residents to be more involved in some of these other ideas here. That's all it means. We're not saying we're going to do it tonight. The idea is let's just not just say we're never going to talk about it again.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll vote in favor of this motion, and here's why. I, as I mentioned before, would only be in favor of the idea of bonding capital expenditures and capital efforts for a short period of time. We have other revenue options that aren't immediately applicable to 15. We've talked about and we have on this list. So this is a bridge strategy. It's a potential opportunity for us at a very inexpensive time to borrow for a short period of time, a couple of years, if and only if we've developed a new revenue source that may not be available this year or next year, but maybe the year after that, and it might be the wise way to go for the next 2 years. I think it deserves more discussion as a possibility, and so that's why I'll vote in favor of it.
Okay. George's motion, all those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4. In opposition? 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm vote in opposition, so it goes down.
I have another motion. Yes, the next motion is move forward the topic of terminating a riverfront urban renewal district.
Second.
Moved and seconded.
The rationale is the same as the other two. I would think probably most of the residents in town here have an imperfect idea of how urban renewal works. I think it's a kind of a complicated topic for them, and there again, I believe people might be interested in knowing that if we sunset that, we would get $360,000 a year every year, and that amount would only increase as property values increase in the district. And there would also be $2.5 million at least for use right now any way we want to use it. And there again, we don't want to always use one-time monies. That would be one-time money, the larger sum. But I feel that 2 years from now, our revenue situation, the budget situation will be much closer to normal than we've seen it since the recession started, and I think it's an appropriate use. You could call it an emergency use. The UWeb property will develop whether we have the riverfront renewal district or not. They haven't even, as far as I'd like to ask a question. Has UWeb, as to your knowledge, have they been receiving bids from potential developers? Have they put an asking price for the property?
I don't believe they've put out an RFP yet. So no, they haven't received any formal bids. My assumption, and it's only assumption, is that they're talking to a variety of people, but they haven't actually put out an RFP.
No, formal. Yeah, that was my understanding. No, the area does have tremendous, potential and everything, but I just don't know if we need a district to fund it. And there again, we may end up not sunsetting the urban renewal district, but if we don't keep I think we need to move it forward so that the general public becomes aware that this is a viable opportunity to help address the budget deficit. That's the rationale behind moving it forward.
Alan?
So, wasn't there a work session poll that you put out on this particular topic?
It's on
And isn't
the-
it on
it's
the agenda
calendar
for coming
down the
up?
road, I
It's-
think.
I don't know, I don't remember seeing it on the calendar, but
It's when we
will.
did get into the discussion of the...
We had one.
We had
I don't
one work
remember when it
session.
is, but
We had one.
We
We had one, and then it was supposed to come back.
Yes.
So that's on the agenda already. So I guess what does the motion do? Just bring it forward? I mean, it's not an
we are asked-
FY15 type of strategy.
Okay, I'll tell you why I made that motion. Here on page 4, it says, under the topic, terminate the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, staff recommendation, this item should not be considered for balancing the FY15 budget.
It's in the...
This motion moves this forward to keep it in play during consideration of the FY15 budget.
Well,
That's all this motion does. So staff is recommending that we not move it forward. This motion says, well, let's keep it in play. We may not use it, but at least it will be, one of the topics that we can discuss.
for FY15, as opposed to FY16 or further.
Well, I mean, FY15 starts July 1st. Pardon me?
Yeah, you're talking about the cutting of it.
Yeah, right. So the second question I had was, so what does the city manager take away from this conversation? So you made this recommendation, and as of right now, we haven't made any changes to it. So in the absence of any changes, you're going to proceed with the implementation of what you recommended.
Sound like me on that sometimes. What we would take away from this is that if the majority of the council agrees with our recommendation on all the items, then we would go under the assumption that these would not be used to balance the FY15 budget. Some of them may be used in a future budget. Some of them will be in other conversations. For example, Urban Renewal District in the context of the development of eWeb, but they would not be used as budget balancing strategies, which also then I think from the Budget Committee's perspective provides them also guidance. It says as they're thinking through the budget after I present that, these won't be the options that now they come back to say, well, now let's implement a business tax as part of their recommendation. So I think it would give them guidance as well.
And specifically to the longer-term strategies, which don't impact FY15, they're not off the table. They're just not in this conversation. They'll be moved forward to different places.
There are some we recommend go to the Revenue Committee, and they may come back from them as a recommendation into the future. The council will have conversation about Urban Renewal District into the future and others as well, but not in the context of balancing this budget.
Right. Okay. So if we don't pass this motion on the Riverfront Urban Renewal District, would that mean that you think it would move forward on the long term?
What we would continue to do is come back to you and have the conversation about the development of eWeb and the Urban Renewal District's role in that, and you can make some policy choices there, everything from killing the district to funding certain projects with that.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Chris?
Thank you. I think it's too soon to start killing off the Urban Renewal District before we've had the second work session or anything else. And I realize saying, well, this is just so we can keep talking about it, but the goal is to kill it. I mean, that's why you're keeping it on the table, is so you can ultimately kill it. You don't just talk about it to talk about it. You have a purpose in mind. And I understand that. I don't think it's time to kill it. I think the logic is that if you want to have the kind of development you want to have, everybody's got to be a player in the game. We didn't get a Broadway Commerce building by just sitting back and saying, it'll take care of itself. We didn't get a Woolworth building by just sitting back and saying, it'll take care of itself, or an LCC building, or any of the other development that's going on downtown. The past logic was, we'll just leave it alone and it'll take care of itself. Didn't help downtown. It was only when we stepped in as a partner, financially and otherwise, that we actually got the downtown we wanted. The same is going to be true in the riverfront area. This urban renewal district, to my understanding, helps to fund the infrastructure that is our part of the partnership there. And if we withdraw that support, saying, oh, don't worry about it, they'll come in and it will take care of itself, I maintain it won't. It won't happen. And so you won't have a riverfront district that will revitalize and renew and redevelop. You may get some taco stands and a Burger King, but you won't get the development you really want unless the city comes in as a partner. And so I think it's too soon to kill that opportunity to be a partner with the infrastructure, even as a conversation item. I'd like to send clearly the signal that we're committed to making that a vital, viable, great place. And if we talk about killing our part of the partnership, we're sending a very different signal. And I'm not prepared to do that at this time.
Okay, so we're going to vote now on George's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 2 in favor and opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes down. So I don't see any other motions. So I think from that, once again, you take.
We take them. Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate
Your
that.
recommendations have been are moving back to the budget committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.